She handed me the envelope while I was still in the hospital gown. Not at home. Not at a kitchen table with coffee going cold between us. Right there in the recovery room at Sunnybrook, 2 days after they'd taken me off the ventilator, when I still had a drain in my side and a blood pressure cuff cycling on my arm every 20 minutes. She set it on the tray table next to my water cup and my half-eaten Jell-O, and she said, "I need you to read this when you're ready." I wasn't ready. I don't think she cared. My name is Raymond. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working construction management in the GTA, 31 years of early mornings, site inspections, union negotiations, cold coffee in a thermos and steel-toed boots that wore out every 14 months like clockwork. I built things. Apartment buildings in Scarborough, a transit hub in Mississauga, a hospital wing in Brampton that I drove past sometimes just to look at it. I built things, and I thought I was building a life too. Turns out I was only half right about that. My wife's name is Cheryl. We met when I was 32 and she was 29, at a housewarming party for a mutual friend in Etobicoke. She laughed at something I said, I don't even remember what, and I thought, that's the one. That's her. 30 years later, I know a little more about how love actually works. It's not the laugh, it's what comes after. It's who stays in the room when things stop being easy. Cheryl is not someone who stays in the room. I should have seen it earlier. Maybe I did and I chose not to name it. We had good years, I genuinely believe that, but the last 5 or 6 had been something else. She'd started a consulting practice, health and wellness, which I supported completely. I drove her to her certification weekend in Collingwood. I took over most of the cooking when she was building her client list. I was proud of her, but as her world got bigger, mine seemed to shrink in her eyes. I was too tired. I worked too much. I didn't travel enough, didn't invest in the relationship, her phrase, from the books she was reading. I started to feel like a problem she was solving rather than a person she was married to. The accident happened on a Wednesday in late November. I was doing a site walk at a new residential development near Vaughan. There was ice on the scaffolding that the crew hadn't flagged yet. Conditions had changed overnight, freezing rain before dawn. I stepped wrong. 12 feet. I don't remember the fall itself. I remember a sound and then a ceiling and then someone saying, "Stay still, sir, don't try to move." I broke 4 ribs, punctured a lung, fractured my pelvis in 2 places. I was in surgery for 6 hours. They kept me sedated for the first 36 hours because the pain management was complicated. When I finally came back to full awareness, my son was sitting in the chair by the window, and the afternoon light was orange through the blinds, and he looked like he'd been crying, though he would never admit that. His name is Theo. He's 28. He works in urban planning, which I always thought was funny, both of us building things, just at different scales. He stood up when he saw my eyes open, and he came to the bed, and he held my hand and didn't say a single word for a long minute. That was enough. That was more than enough. Cheryl came the next morning. She was composed. That's the word I kept coming back to later. Composed, not relieved, not shaken. Not the way you'd expect someone to look walking into a room where their husband had nearly died 48 hours earlier. Composed. She asked how I was feeling. I said rough. She said the house was fine. She'd fed the cat. There was no need to worry about anything at home. Then she left after 20 minutes to meet a client. I didn't say anything about it. I was on enough pain medication that I was willing to chalk it up to her way of coping. People handle fear differently. I know that. But she'd already made her decision by then. I understand that now. On the 4th day, she brought the envelope. She set it on the tray table, said what she said, and when I looked up at her face, I saw it. That particular flatness behind the eyes that I'd learned over years meant she had already moved past whatever was happening in front of her. She had gone ahead of the moment. She was already somewhere else. I didn't open it while she was there. I waited until she left, until the nurse had come and gone, until the ward quieted down to that particular nighttime hum of machines and muffled footsteps and someone 2 rooms over watching television. Then I opened it. Separation agreement, drafted by a family law solicitor I didn't recognize, an office on Bay Street. The terms were what I would have expected if I'd been expecting this, which I hadn't been. She was claiming half of everything. The house in Leaside, which I'd owned before we married and which she'd moved into, which had tripled in value in 30 years. The investment accounts. Half my pension from the construction company. She'd listed it all. Her solicitor had done thorough work. There was a note on top in her handwriting, short. It said she thought this was the right time for both of them to be honest. She said she'd been unhappy for years. She said she hoped I would recover fully, and that she wished me well. She wished me well. I put the papers down on the tray table, and I looked at the ceiling for a long time. There's a particular quality to hospital ceilings, the way they're both very close and very far away. I thought about 30 years. About the housewarming party in Etobicoke. About the morning we brought Theo home from the hospital. How small he was. How I'd been genuinely terrified. About the drives we used to take on Sunday mornings out toward Durham region when we were younger. No destination, just going. I thought about all of that, and then I thought about something else. About a conversation I'd had with a lawyer named Francis, my own lawyer, someone I'd used for contract work on job sites for 15 years. I'd called him 2 weeks before the accident, actually, not because I suspected anything imminent, but because I'd been feeling for a while that the marriage was in serious trouble and I wanted to understand my position. I'm a construction manager. I plan for contingencies. I don't like being caught unprepared. Francis had asked me some questions. I'd answered them. He'd explained some things about Ontario family law that I hadn't known. Here's what I hadn't known: the house in Leaside, which I'd owned before the marriage, was not automatically subject to equal division. Under Ontario's Family Law Act, the value of property you bring into the marriage is deducted from what gets divided. The increase in value is shared, but not the original equity. Francis had walked me through the numbers. Given what I'd paid for the house in 1994 and what it was worth now, my protected equity was substantial. There was something else. Years ago, when Theo was small and money was tighter, Cheryl and I had talked about life insurance. We both taken out policies. Standard practice, Francis said, but there was a clause in mine that I hadn't paid close attention to. If we separated and the separation was initiated by one party in certain circumstances, I won't get into the technical language. There were implications for how the policy's accumulated cash value was treated as an asset in the division. Francis had flagged it. I'd filed it in the back of my mind. And then there was the disability insurance. I'd been paying into a private disability policy through a broker since 2008. Cheryl didn't know the details of it. We'd handled our finances relatively separately for years, a practical arrangement given that she had her business and I had mine. The policy had a clause: in the event of a work-related injury causing long-term disability, it would pay out a monthly benefit. Given the nature of my injuries, fractured pelvis, the lung complication, there was a reasonable chance I was going to be off work for a significant period. A very significant period. The disability payments would flow to me, not to a household, not to a joint account. To me. I hadn't told Cheryl any of this. Pinugulid called Francis from my hospital bed at 11:30 at night. He picked up because I'd texted him first and he knew it was serious. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She filed while you're in hospital." I said yes. He said, "Okay. That's actually going to be relevant. Don't sign anything." I said I hadn't. He said he'd be there in the morning. I put the phone down and I looked at the envelope on the tray table. 31 years of site management will teach you something about documents. They're just paper. It's what's in the ground that matters. The foundation, the rebar, the things you can't see from the surface. What's in the ground is what holds. Francis came at 8 the next morning. He'd brought coffee, a large from Tim Hortons, and he set it on my tray table with the kind of matter-of-fact efficiency I'd always appreciated about him. He pulled the chair up close, and we talked for 2 hours. He'd already reviewed the separation agreement overnight. He knew the solicitor on the other side slightly, not friends, just colleagues in overlapping practice areas. He said the agreement had been drafted carefully, but it had some assumptions baked into it that weren't going to hold up. The house first. The original equity calculation worked in my favor significantly. The house had been appraised at $1.1 million in a market assessment 2 years earlier. What I'd paid in 1994 and the improvements I'd documented since. I was meticulous about that. Receipts for everything. A habit from 20 years of managing project budgets meant my protected interest was not small. The pension, more complicated, but not unfavorable. The years pre-marriage were clearly demarcated. I had the records, the disability policy. Francis looked at me when we got to this and he said, "She doesn't know about this, does she?" I said no. He said, "And the premiums have been paid from your personal account, not joint." I said yes. He said, "Then it's yours. Full stop." We talked about process. He said to expect it to take time. Ontario family law doesn't move fast, and with my medical situation it would move even slower. He said that was actually fine. Time was my friend here. The longer the process took, the more clearly my disability status and its financial implications would be established. He said one more thing before he left. He said, "Raymond, I know this is hard, but you're not in a weak position here. Don't let her solicitor convince you otherwise." I thanked him. He left. I lay there and listened to the blood pressure cuff cycle again. That afternoon, Cheryl came back. She sat in the chair where Theo usually sat. She asked if I'd read the agreement. I said I had. She asked if I had any questions. I said no. She looked at me for a moment. I think she was expecting something else, anger or pleading or the particular kind of wounded silence that she'd learned over 30 years how to interpret and manage. She was very good at managing. It was one of her skills. I didn't give her any of that. She said, "I think this is the right thing, Raymond, for both of us." I said, "Okay." She left. The months that followed were the longest of my life in some ways and also, strangely, among the most clarifying. I was in hospital for 3 more weeks. Theo came every day. My younger sister drove up from Hamilton twice and stayed at the house, which I'd asked her to do partly for company and partly, I'll admit, because I didn't want Cheryl to have unsupervised access to the filing cabinets while I was unable to be there. My sister thought I was being paranoid. She's probably right that I was a little. But I'd spent 30 years in project management and I'd seen what happens when people feel like the job is nearly done and they start cutting corners on the way out. The WSIB claim moved forward. The scaffolding company had been cited before for safety violations. My own records from the site, which I kept on my phone in photographs, were relevant. There was going to be a significant settlement. Francis's office coordinated with the WSIB file. Cheryl's solicitor sent a letter in February requesting a financial disclosure. We provided it, fully and accurately as required by law. The disability policy was in there. I can only imagine that conversation in her solicitor's office. The policy had been accumulating for 15 years. The monthly benefit, combined with my WSIB compensation, put me in a position that I don't think she had calculated when she drafted the terms of that separation agreement. She came to see me in March after I was home, but still on crutches and doing outpatient physio 3 times a week at a clinic in North York. Theo was out. She sat at the kitchen table. Her former kitchen table. Technically, that was still being sorted. And she was, for the first time I could remember in years, not composed. She said she hadn't known about the disability coverage. I said, "I know." She said, "The agreement I proposed, I think we should discuss it more." I said, My lawyer will be in contact with your lawyer." She looked at me the way she used to look at me sometimes when we were younger, when something I said surprised her, like she was recalibrating. I used to find that look flattering. That night I just found it informative. She left without the agreement she'd come for. The legal process took 14 months from the date she filed. It was expensive and it was grinding, and there were days I lay in bed in the spare room I'd moved into. I slept better in there, easier on my hip, and I stared at the ceiling and I missed the marriage. Not Cheryl, exactly. Not the last version of her. But the thing I'd thought we had. The person I'd thought I was to her. You grieve even when you're the one who ends up standing. The final settlement was nothing like the agreement she'd brought to my hospital room. The house in Leaside stayed with me. She received her share of the equity increase. That was fair, and Francis and I had never disputed it. But the baseline calculation stood. I kept the full pension entitlement for the pre-marriage years, which was substantial, given that I'd started the plan in my late 20s. The disability policy was mine entirely. The WSIB settlement was mine. She received a fair division of the joint assets we'd actually built together. The shared investment account, some mutual funds, some savings. That was appropriate. I don't believe in unfairness, even toward people who've been unfair to you. Her solicitor had gone into those negotiations expecting a different set of numbers. That much was clear. Theo asked me once, somewhere in the middle of all of it, whether I was angry at her. I thought about it. I said, not really. I was sad, yes. I was tired. I was lonely in a way that surprised me, given that I'd been lonely in the marriage for years. But angry. That requires believing the other person owed you something they chose to withhold. I don't think Cheryl owed me more than she had in her. I just finally stopped expecting what she couldn't give. I still live in the Leaside house. I'm walking without the cane now, mostly. I use it on bad weather days, which in Toronto is not nothing. I retired from active site management last spring, which I'd been planning to do at 65 anyway. I consult part-time for a firm downtown when I want to, and when I don't want to, I don't. I have a vegetable garden out back that Cheryl always said was impractical for the size of the lot. She was right about the size of the lot. She was wrong about whether it mattered. Last October, Theo brought a woman to Sunday dinner. Her name is Amara. She works in environmental engineering. She shook my hand and looked me in the eye and asked me genuine questions about the garden. And I thought, that's what it looks like. That's what staying in the room looks like. That's what staying in the room looks like. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just made the dinner and poured the wine and listened to the two of them laugh about something at the other end of the table. The envelope is still in the filing cabinet. I kept it. Not for bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I kept it the same way I kept every project document I ever produced, every inspection record, every change order signed in bad weather on a plywood board. Because the record is the record. Because what happened, happened. And because I've learned in 63 years of building things that the foundation matters more than the surface. The surface can be repainted, renovated, sold. The foundation is what you laid down when no one was watching. Mine held. I've been thinking lately about what it actually means to be ready for something. Not ready in the way we usually mean it. Packed bags, a plan written out, everything tidy. I mean the deeper kind. The kind where you've looked honestly at the situation in front of you, at yourself, at what you're capable of, and you've decided quietly that whatever comes next, you won't collapse under it. When Cheryl set that envelope on my tray table, she was counting on me not being that kind of ready. And I understand why. I was 63 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a fractured pelvis and a tube in my side, and she had a Bay Street solicitor and a drafted agreement, and 30 years of knowing exactly which version of me was most likely to fold. She had done her calculation. She just had the wrong numbers. I'm not proud of everything about how my marriage ended. There's no version of a 30-year relationship dissolving that leaves anyone looking clean. I made my own mistakes. I worked too much. I assumed too long that stability was the same thing as connection. I let distance become the background of our life together, instead of addressing it directly. Those are mine. I own them. But here's what I've come to understand. Sitting in the Leaside house on quiet evenings watching the garden do what gardens do, the choices we make in the hard moments are not separate from the choices we make every day. Francis didn't save me. He helped me, genuinely. And I'm grateful. But the reason I was able to call him at 11:30 at night from a hospital bed and have a real conversation was because I had spent 31 years doing things with integrity, keeping records, paying premiums, building my professional reputation carefully enough that a lawyer I'd worked with for 15 years picked up the phone without hesitation. The ground I was standing on, even lying flat in that hospital bed, was ground I had laid myself. Theo called me a few months after the settlement was finalized. He asked how I was really doing. I said, honestly, better than I expected. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "You never seemed scared." I told him I was scared plenty. I was scared the night I read the agreement. I was scared during those long weeks of physio when I wasn't sure how much function I'd get back. I was scared of being 63 and alone and starting over. But fear and falling apart are not the same thing. You can carry fear like weight in a pack. It slows you down, you feel it, but you keep going. What keeps you going, I think, is something you either build in yourself over a long life or you don't. It's the habit of doing the right thing even when it's inconvenient. It's the discipline of thinking clearly when emotion is pulling you somewhere easier. It's the stubbornness, and I mean that as a compliment, to stay standing when the situation is designed to knock you down. I didn't know, the night Cheryl brought that envelope, that things would work out the way they did. I didn't know the disability policy would matter the way it did, or that Francis's advice would be as solid as it turned out to be. I just knew that I had tried to live honestly, to keep my affairs in order, to build things that would hold. That's all any of us can do, really. The foundation is what you laid when no one was watching.